All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. I don't know how long this conversation will be, but this is a hot topic right now on social media and everywhere else. And it's really difficult to describe what I'm trying to say about this situation around Joe Rogan in tweets. So I just wanted to come on here and try to explain to people what the issue is. This is not about defending Joe Rogan and the things that he has said in the past. This is about trying to get you guys to see a larger issue. And it's one that if you've been frustrated by the coverage of the Ethiopia conflict, it is connected. And so I want to try to kind of weave the timeline of events that led up to this sudden demonization of Joe Rogan in order to help you see how the organized government/corporate media works in terms of demonizing someone and trying to shut down spaces where dissenting voices are allowed to speak. Okay, so I want to get us into a certain headspace when we saw the coverage of the Ethiopia conflict on mainstream media. It was impossible, right, to try to get a different narrative on CNN or any other corporate media space, right? It was frustrating regardless of what you thought you knew and the different points of data there were. It was frustrating to see a different narrative being told. It was frustrating that there was no context there, and there was really nowhere to go that had a huge following, right? Joe Rogan's space would have been that type of place to be able to go to a space that had millions of followers to say something that was different than that was being told by the current government as well as the mainstream media, right? So I just want to go through the timeline of this particular situation. So in mid-January, there were a group of doctors, over 200, that wrote a letter saying they wanted Joe Rogan's podcast, the Joe Rogan Experience, to be censored because it was putting out misleading information about vaccines. I believe, at least in the conversation around it, they were referring to one conversation with a doctor that was saying that there were misleading information about vaccines. Mind you, we are 2 years into the pandemic. So either people have decided what they feel about the vaccine or they haven't, right? So having a place where 2+ hour conversations where varying points are discussed is not dangerous, right? The idea is to be able to hear other varying points and then to make a decision for yourself. A lot of us got the vaccine anyway. We don't know what the long-term effects are, but we weighed the risks and we went ahead and got it. So that open letter happened in mid-January. It didn't get a whole lot of attention, although it was covered in what you would call mainstream spaces. Later in the month, later in January, the Surgeon General, who is a government employee, went on MSNBC and specifically said again that Joe Rogan's podcast should be censored because of anti-vax information, right? So what Spotify did in response to that is they put a disclaimer at the beginning of his episodes. Great. That seems like a reasonable action to take. And then the White House spokesperson went further and said Spotify needs to do more. That was yesterday, I believe. It does not make sense, first of all, that government spokespeople are telling private media companies how to censor content, especially content that has a variety of voices and that allows people to make their own decisions. So the fact that a government employee, official, is telling a private media company that should concern everybody, right? Because the conversation we keep having about mainstream media is that the information is controlled. They only put out what the government or corporate interests tell them to put out. So this is exactly what's happening. This is an explicit form of that. So that in of itself should make you concerned. And then what Spotify did, or let me backtrack. Right around then, we see a compilation of Joe Rogan saying the N-word from years ago over the course of 12 years suddenly appear. Again, you have to question that. These things don't suddenly happen. So they use something like the N-word, which is triggering for a lot of people, understandably, right? And now it's gone from information about the vaccine to he's a racist. So the question and the proposition I put to people is just hold off on hating someone or deciding they're racist or they're this or they're that or they're evil or they're genocide, or just wait before you make your decision. There is no rush. If you would like to cancel Joe Rogan and his podcast, there's plenty of time for that. You don't need to hop on when all the corporate media spaces are telling you to do that, but you should question, why should we all of a sudden hate this guy? Where did all this stuff get dug up from? Why are government officials commenting on whether his show should be censored or not? And why has the conversation changed from anti-vax information to now he's a racist? So I think he actually handled several things well. He has come out and said, maybe, this is before the compilation came out, maybe I should have more varying voices on the show. Maybe I should have the opposite perspective right after I have somebody on. I don't always do all my research before a guest. Maybe I should do more of that. So you've got somebody that has a huge following willing to say, okay, I can change some things. I can adjust some things. When have you seen CNN at any point correct the completely misleading false information about the Ethiopia conflict? When? They still haven't done it. So when you see a person that's willing to do that, again, we should allow these kind of spaces to exist, right? We live in the United States of America where freedom of speech is coveted, et cetera, et cetera. So we should be okay with that. We should all have the emotional strength to hear something that doesn't sound right to us, to hear discussions that are 2+ hours long. If anyone hasn't listened to this podcast, these are long conversations. It's not somebody coming on, giving a bite, and now you have to make a decision about that. Right. So it's true freedom of information in the sense that it gives you everything that you need, and then you can decide it. Somebody actually said, okay, so Alex Jones, I don't know if this account is real. They said, I only care about Ethiopia for all I care, Joe and all the US, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but if you don't understand how the system works, then you'll only maybe be good for Ethiopia. And then you're going to become a problem for every other issue where it looks similar in terms of structure, right? So then what does, after this compilation suddenly comes out, what happens with Spotify? They pull a bunch of his episodes. Over 100 is what was reported. So what Joe Rogan symbolizes is that you can have a large following and make lots of money, as he did with this deal with Spotify, without having to bend in terms of the information you put out to corporate interests and the government. What this situation tries to do is say, no, you can't. If we decide to go after you, if a government official decides you need to be censored, and then if we put out all this maligning information, get some artists to say they're pulling their music from Spotify because of anti-vax information, why do they care so much right now? You have to question that in terms of the timing, right? And then he does actually get censored. Spotify pulls a bunch of his episodes. So that pokes a hole in the idea that you can have a successful space without bending to a certain corporate narrative. So yes, we can talk about these nasty videos. We can talk about whether he's a racist or not, but that's the conversation they throw out there and want you to have. Just like with the Ethiopia conflict, the conversation they want you to have is about genocide. If you want to understand the context, nope, can't talk about that. This is genocide. So do you see the connection? I think it's really, really important to know when you're being triggered intentionally, to know when the conversation is being changed on purpose in order to shut down dissenting voices. So you don't have to defend him, but you don't need to be a part of the chorus that has the conversation about this compilation that was put out. You're literally working against yourself. Now, let's talk about some of the other type of conversations that Joe Rogan has. It varies. Some things I don't want to listen to. Some things I'm okay with. There's things he says I don't like. It's fine. We all have to have the backbone to be able to pick and choose. But I will say this, I've listened to long podcasts with people that are supposed to be from a different political leaning or that I'm not supposed to like. And you come out at the end of it and you say, okay, I agree with some of that. I don't agree with other things. But you don't have to walk away and say, oh, he's conservative or she's conservative, so I hate everything she says. He's progressive, so I co-sign everything they say, right? Here's another really big thing that people have to understand. The midterm elections are coming up. In some states, the primaries start in about a month or so. All the corporate spaces will probably be saying a lot of the same things in favor of the Democrats who are currently in power. This is an entity that has taken the votes of Black people for granted. We saw some of the insane things that Joe Biden was able to get away with saying when he was on Charlemagne the God's, or on the show with Breakfast Club with Charlemagne the God. What did he say? Basically, if you're Black, you're voting for me. And then he could do whatever he wants once he gets into power, right? So some of the things we talk about in terms of being able to hear different points of view help us become more informed voters. Maybe you would have voted for him anyway because he thought Trump was super bad. What do a lot of Ethiopians and Eritreans say right now when they see how the conflict in the Horn has been handled? Oh, next time we're going Republican. Right? We should have never voted for the Biden administration. They're literally killing people or helping kill people by supporting this terrorist group that started a war. Okay, so let's bring that lesson into the space. If we don't agree that ethnicity determines values, if you don't agree that, just because you're of a certain race that you're for us, okay. If you don't agree just because you're Democrat, you're for marginalized groups, then you have to exercise it in these moments where that same coordinated space is telling you whether to love or hate someone. We need these more independent spaces. People say, oh, no, he's corporate anyway because he's got this $100 million deal from Spotify. Yeah, but Spotify wasn't telling him what to say or not say. In fact, they were getting a lot of crap for having this person as an exclusive show on their podcast, but they were still letting him do whatever he wants in terms of the conversations he was talking about. I know Samira Khan, one of, I actually don't know exactly what she does, but I follow her on Twitter and she's very engaged in what's going on in Ethiopia. But she has these series of sarcastic tweets where she's basically like, sure, yeah, let's hate Joe Rogan. He's the one who lied to us about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Sure, let's hate Joe Rogan. He's the one that wrote the 1994 crime bill, which is Biden's crime bill that had devastating effects on the Black community. And the other thing to consider is once you see how progressives can sort of use you to lean one way or the other and not look at the other side, then you'll see why the other side or people on the Republican side will also get more polarized, right? Okay, I've got my moderator. Okay, he told me I froze, but I'm back. So all that I am saying when it comes to this attack on Joe Rogan is we should not jump on what corporate media and the government, literally, they've been so explicit. You so rarely have scenarios where a government official says, yeah, we should censor that podcast on that private company. So they're telling you right there where they stand. We're 2 years into the pandemic. We're not in a state of emergency. If you feel right to get the vaccine, go ahead. If you don't, continue to take that risk, whatever it may be, just like those of us who are taking the vaccine are also considering there might be a risk in the future, but we have made our decision, right? So let's not be a part of shutting down these spaces where you can have these discussions. Again, I would prefer to have a space where there's a 2+ hour conversation with somebody so I can really hear all the things that they think and then decide for myself, as opposed to having a 5-minute conversation on CNN where they tell you, yeah, this guy's a dictator, there's a genocide, goodbye. Right? That's not training you how to think. It's not about, the ideas that are on his podcast are all right or the people are all right. No, it is helping you exercise your brain. It's allowing you to hear these different perspectives, and then you can make your own decision. Just like you should also apply that to when you're making decisions about political candidates. All right, I want to hear everything about this person, or as much as I can, or all the different takes. And then I want to decide. I don't want to hear a 5-minute segment on one of the main stream media segments and then be told who to vote for. And then once they get into office, they do whatever they want. I get upset, and then they're back with a different tactic. One of the things that I thought was absolutely, I mean, there's a lot about this conversation that's insane, because I think, government officials coming out so explicitly is really insane for freedom of the press, freedom of speech in the United States. But another headline that was circulating in mainstream outlets was that the Obamas were considering pulling their podcast from Spotify because of anti-vax information. The Obamas, who are Democrats, the Obamas who are with this administration, not officially, but right, with pro-Biden, all that stuff. What do they have to do with this situation? What does their podcast being on Spotify really have to do with anything 2 years in? Right? The only impact this may have if people start to feel like, oh, I don't need to keep getting this vaccine, or I don't need to keep getting these boosters, is the bottom line for the pharmaceutical companies goes down. That's it. That's it. Like, that is probably part of it. And then there's a political end where midterm elections are coming up. Joe Rogan has millions of followers, some of the most diverse audience, and a lot of them are young voters of voting age. We don't need him coming in and trying to dissect and critically think and offer up different ideas, right? So it's, people are so triggered by the compilation or the statement about, Planet of the Apes. I get it. Like, I get it. But the larger, more dangerous issue is that we cannot have these spaces, because if we didn't have social media, if we didn't have Twitter, we saw all the censorship that happened anyway, no more would not have happened. We all would have just been head spinning, frustrated. We can't get this other narrative out. We can't get the true narrative out. Okay, so we need to be pro these spaces that are not so corporatized. And in fact, I would argue Twitter is pretty corporatized, right? How quick was it that No More Trending was taken down? I mean, it was within days of it trending. Why? What was it about the hashtag No More that was so dangerous, right? So it really is, I think, does a disservice to what we have learned with No More if we cannot apply the skepticism to other issues, because we don't want to be a part of the problem when it comes to other people's issues, right? So you come in and there's another country that's being maligned, or there's a domestic issue that's being presented, and we get triggered by this compilation of N-words or whatever, and then all of a sudden we're like all on that and not really going, okay, wait, why now? Why now, right? So I'm trying to go through some of you guys' comments to see if there's any specific points to address. Earlier, username Ethiopia Year 2021 Vision said, Western journalism is a weapon of mass subjugation. Those who are misguided in believing it, that it is a truth teller, are mistaken. The conflict comes from Afrocentric versus Eurocentric journalism. That, that's one way to put it. I think there's some truth to that. But at the end of the day, the more democratized spaces as possible. I don't know what's going to happen with this situation. Honestly, the reason that Joe Rogan is so popular and has the audience that he does, audience that are both left-leaning and right-leaning, is because so many people have been frustrated and have just gotten sick of the mainstream media's monopoly on truths, right? So I actually think, this is a personal opinion, not so much a professional one, because I'm not a business expert, but I think Spotify may have made a huge mistake by being so reactive and pulling so many episodes. Some people say it was him that pulled it. Some people say it was them. There's not a whole lot of clarity in that. But it literally is kind of shooting itself in the foot, because he has a huge following, and the reason he has it is exactly the reason we just saw. When they don't like what you're saying, or when you have too much of an audience, then they'll find different ways to demonize you and take you down, just like we see with leaders of foreign nations. If they don't like, you know, what you're trying to do for your people, if they don't like that you're trying to be more independent, no problem. We'll demonize you, tell everybody you're a dictator, you're a genocider, support a war that's happening on your turf, and hopefully we'll try to get rid of you, whether it's through a coup or whether it's by mobilizing the masses against you, right? So these spaces have failed for a reason, the mainstream media spaces, and that's why people go to places like the Joe Rogan Experience. And so seeing this explicit form of attacking this show for reasons that aren't really that believable right now, what's it going to do? It's going to strengthen his base. And what that's going to look like, it remains to be seen. He was getting a lot of money from Spotify, so maybe he'll lose out on some of the money, but I think in terms of his following, it'll be strong. And somebody else will come in and take advantage or support his baseline, right? Okay, I want to go through a few more comments, and then I'll probably get off, and then I'll come on later in the week with voices that will be able to kind of dig deeper into this issue. One of the guests that I want to get is one that's pretty well versed in the concept of manufacturing consent. That's the name of a book that was written in 1988, I believe it was. I want to read you guys what that is. It's the Wikipedia description, but it's essentially the definition of manufacturing consent. So the book is called Manufacturing Consent, the Political Economy of the Mass Media. And it argues that the mass communications media in the US, quote, are effective and powerful ideological institutions that carry out a system-supportive propaganda function. A system-supportive propaganda function. System being the government, system being corporate media. It's supported. Like, it does not happen by itself. And I would also argue they use civic institutions, so professionals. So when you see that open letter from it was 270 healthcare professionals saying that Joe Rogan should be censored, when you see so-called professionals and human rights professionals pushing the genocide narrative on Ethiopia, pushing narratives that only make the terrorist group that actually started the war the victim, you start to wonder if you're someone that's outside of the conflict or don't understand how communications and media works. You go, well, all these professionals and healthcare workers and human rights advocates are saying this is a genocide, so it must be genocide. No, it wouldn't work without their voices. So the same is true with other issues. In this case, as healthcare workers. Was it by design? Were they, was there somebody within that 270 that had alliances or probably? I mean, it's too random. It's 2 years in. Again, this is not the biggest issue at this point. It's really, we're talking about boosters or no boosters. Let me finish this, and then Abinazar, I'm going to get to your question. Sorry, guys. It'd help to have a producer. And I mean, I actually do have a moderator in here, but let's see. Okay, so let me finish this definition, and then we'll get to a couple more questions, and I'll probably let you guys go for the day. So manufacturing consent argues that communications media of the US are effective and powerful ideological institutions that carry out a system-supportive propaganda function by reliance on market forces, internalized assumptions, and self-censorship, and without covert coercion by means of the propaganda model of communication. So we're all, when we jump on this N-word bandwagon, this anti-vax, he's anti-science, blah, 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 and then we want to cancel him, we're all basically giving consent. The mass communication system is getting your consent without forcing you. They're just saying to you, hey, this guy's anti-science. Hey, oh, look at this. Have you guys seen the compilation from years ago? So somebody went in and actually went through 12 years of shows that started years ago to pick out the N-word. And yes, it was not him using it at other people. Like, that matters. I don't know if you care. But they went and picked it up and told you, now he's a racist, we should all take him down. To the point where we should take his show down. To the point where we should pull episodes. Okay, so if that's the punishment that he gets, and then the punishment from certain Democratic leaders or Republican leaders when they pass laws that actually hurt communities for generations, as we end up voting for them because we think the other side is just so bad we can't be. And they know that. When CNN just gets to have its space, there's no comment from the government about misinformation on their part. When there's no one that is telling the government, like, what's up with all the misinformation that you guys had on the Ethiopia conflict? No, who are they to hold one podcaster accountable when they're not held accountable on both ends? The media was supposed to hold the government accountable, and it's not. And if the government has some power over media in terms of FCC rules, etc., but they're going beyond that. They're going beyond that and deciding, who has the information and who doesn't. Thank you for all the positive comments. Really appreciate you guys. Let me read. Let's see. Let me read these first before I read them out loud. Okay, so all right, let's have this question. Okay, here's a question for you from Abenazer. I assume you asked it in good faith, so I will read it. You worked in the liberal media. When did you turn or think like conservative? Do you think CBS is liberal media? Is Al Jazeera America? That happens here, liberal media. Is the other current TV actually probably would argue liberal media and the Young Turks. It was owned by Al Gore. And there I was called the secret conservative. Why? Because I like a diversity and balance of ideas. If you're always attacking one side, never seeing the critique there, or never seeing any of the ideas there, and always supporting the other side, I think ultimately you do more bad than good, right? So if you're true journalists would be considered a little bit of both, right? But depending on who's in government, depending on who's the most powerful, I mean, I would argue it is, you know what, you have a good point there. In general, I would argue mainstream media is liberal media, because you saw when Trump was president that all these spaces, that's where we got the CNN fake news term, right? Which a lot of people thought, okay, like that's a little much. And then you saw what they did with the Ethiopia conflict. And what did we all say? Well, yeah, I guess there's some truth to that, right? So it's anything that just narrows down a person to a word, narrows down a conflict to one word, like a genocide, narrows down a leader as a dictator, narrows down a person that has literally endless hours of content as a racist by piecing together certain things. I think we all should be wary of that. And I know it is, easier to just decide someone is all bad or all good. But ultimately what it does is it puts us in a position where we're not well informed and we make a decision that actually goes against ourselves. Okay, another question I will read. Thanks for bearing with me, by the way. Trying to multitask is not easy. Hermela, you worked in corporate media. What exactly gave you an epiphany? What did you learn or uncover that changed your trajectory? So there's a couple of ways I could answer it. So many good questions coming in. Thank you so much. I'm going to try to mark them. Okay, cool. So, all right. So the epiphany about Ethiopia is very specific, right? And then I'll talk about the larger issue that I have seen. So on Ethiopia, a lot of you know the story. I came in very pushing the mainstream media narrative, really believing it, although behind the scenes questioning a lot of things. And over time, I was able to see a timeline of events, the way they were reported by the mainstream media, what the government was always saying, what they weren't saying, what they were leaving out, they were always saying it was a genocide, but never talking about that it was a war that was started by the group that was supposedly trying to defend from a genocide, the group that was in power for 27 years with the support of the West, the group that literally killed its fellow soldiers in the middle of the night, starting that war. They kept talking about blockade and famine, but they would never discuss that there was actually a lot of aid that was going in during that time. And of course, it had to be controlled to some extent because there was an active war happening. There was a ceasefire that happened in June. The TPLF decided they were going to call it a joke and keep going. They went into the regions of Amhara and Afar after June. CNN didn't report it. Literally one article in the BBC actually captured it. So it took time for me to see, oh my God, like this is intentional. They're just going with the government's narrative. And it is actually so damaging to the people on the ground, including the people in Tigray, right? It is, I think, arguably, I don't know that it's even a debate. There is no one that has been more hurt as a group than the people in Tigray. We saw hundreds of thousands of people that are reportedly killed by the admission of the leaders on that side, right? So that's sort of what took me into the epiphany about mainstream media and how they were reporting overseas, and how that much was just government propaganda more than anything else. And as we're trying to multitask, let me talk about like the larger issue. So I worked in corporate spaces, arguably corporate spaces for the most time, or for the most of the 10 years or so. And I've seen a lot of censorship that's very light, or that's not, aggressive, but it's there. It changes the wording of things to kind of confuse the situation. I work in LA, where there's it's California. It's a democratic space. We have a lot of issues, particularly with homelessness. There is, I believe, over 100,000 people on the streets as we speak in the city of LA with a Democratic leadership. They set aside last year $100 million for the issue, and it never goes to the people that needs help. It never actually goes directly to that. And there's reports that confirmed reports from the LA Times that a lot of that money is going to developers that are building $800,000 units when they should be building these large structures for as homeless shelters, and when they should be putting that money towards social services, which is what a lot of these people need, because some of them have addiction issues, some of them have mental health issues that stem from coming out or from living on the streets. And so that money doesn't go there, and no local mainstream media digs into that. We do these stories, and I've tried to actually get it in there. So we do these stories that are like, look at all these homeless people, like they're filling the streets. Tents are outside of people's homes, near schools. Look how damaged these people are. They're hurting each other. They're now hurting the general population. But we never say, okay, but where's all that money, taxpayer money, going that is allotted every year, right? So you see those sort of censorships and omissions. Why don't, you can speculate as to why. I mean, is it because we have a Democratic leadership? Is it because even if we didn't, they just don't want to ruffle the feathers of local leadership? But nonetheless, it's a problem. And so I've always as my career advanced, I became more aware of that type of censorship and how it actually really maintains the status quo and does not solve issues. And so when this whole Ethiopia thing came, it was like, you know what? It's just too many things now. It's too many things. I was going to go independent, or thinking about going independent before this Ethiopia conflict anyway, because I felt like what I'm doing is not making a difference. Not when I'm in this space where I'm not really able to cover the stories I want to cover, or, there's like, I have so many good things to say about where I worked for the last 3 years, and it's not specific to them. It's just a larger issue. No matter how great of people you work with, they work under a certain system. And so it was clear to me that unless I had more space to be able to speak more freely, to be able to interview the type of people I wanted to interview and have the kind of conversations I wanted to have, then I really wasn't going to be making a huge difference. Sure, I was going to take home a comfortable, guaranteed salary, but it's not going to ultimately get to the bottom of certain issues. And honestly, that is why I got into journalism. I mean, as a lot of you, I come from a background that's, disadvantaged and from, a community that's not, as we saw with the Ethiopia conflict, that doesn't have their voices heard when push comes to shove. I know what it means to be poor and struggling and all these different things. So I don't want to be doing work that's not helping that in any way. A couple more good questions I'll get to. I didn't think I'd be able to talk by myself this long, but you guys are great and keeping me engaged. Let's see. Thank you, Save Me Tube. Okay, somebody offered, you can see the article on the news site Gray Zone about Wikipedia, the corrupt encyclopedia. Again, those established information sources ridden with different biased pieces of information. You see we saw with some of the pro-TPLF activists literally going into Wikipedia and changing certain narratives about my cadre, about, what's going on in the Amhara Afar region. So it's like, honestly, guys, it takes a lot of work, but there are people like, that have these long form podcasts that will offer ways for you to understand it. Yeah, it still takes a lot of time to be invested, but either you do that or you don't jump on certain narratives that you're told to jump on. So you just decide, like, I'm going to be more of a passive person. I'm not going to get into these conversations because I don't have the time to understand enough. Or you take the time, you dig in, you try to listen to diversity of voices, and then you make a decision. But when you're not willing to do the work, but you're willing to be a part of the machine's propaganda to take down certain people that are going against their voice, then you're just a part of the problem and not a part of the solution. Okay, a couple more comments. Somebody said, I'm Tagaran, support you, Hermela. Time to bring peace to our people. Agree. Definitely time to bring peace. Hopefully this national dialogue will be a part of that. I did see a list that was put out for some of the people that might be on it. And it's a lot of, there's like professors and professionals. I don't believe it's a lot of political folks in there. Again, it remains to be seen. That doesn't mean the conversation will be fair, but it's a good start. And I'd rather have hope in that than not at this point. Isn't the party currently in power part of the old coalition? I'm not sure what that means, but I mean, they're definitely part of the establishment. Okay, so CNN is fighting because Joe Rogan called him out on CNN's deceit, stating one of the medicine he took as a horse pill when he got COVID. That is true. I don't know if that's the only reason. I think they might be upset that he has such a huge following and their ratings are declining and their credibility more than anything is declining. I mean, I don't know too many Ethiopians and Eritreans that can take that can take CNN seriously at this point. That was an insane amount of propaganda. And that's true for a lot of Syrians, a lot of Iraqis, folks that I don't know the numbers, but a lot of people from Haiti who've seen the mainstream media, reinforce these stereotypes of Black folks and leave out that there's certain U.S. policies that are actually economically destroying their countries, that are actually starting wars under these false premises. I mean, if we're talking about misinformation, let's talk about these entities that literally put out information that was completely inaccurate, that started a war like the Iraqi war, and then changed the course of history in the Middle East. The Middle East is what it is today because of the Iraq war. There's so many different ways that had an impact on that region. And if you guys haven't seen it, it's on my YouTube page. There's a discussion that I do with several journalists from different backgrounds, kind of going into how these false narratives are created, going into how certain narratives in the media actually hide why certain conflicts are happening, hide how much damage is actually being done to innocent people in these different spaces. Question, is there any Western media you may single out for being relatively fair? Probably depends on the topic. When it comes to it really depends on the topic. Like, there are things they can get right because it doesn't really ruffle anybody's feathers. But when it comes to things that are very controversial or that are, anti what, government policy might be, I don't know too many that stand out. You know what? Okay, so it depends on how Western media. You didn't say mainstream Western media. Okay, there's a couple I'll give a shout out to. So BT News, a lot of you guys know Eugene Perrier and Rania. I think they do a really great job. They are Western media. They're based here, and then Rania is based in Lebanon, I believe. They do really great work in terms of domestic issues. Honestly, there's a lot of times I have to lean on them to try to start to get an understanding of something. This actually feeds into the question earlier about how do you get to the bottom of things without doing too much work, or BT News is one place to start. And then another place that I think does a generally good job, although I haven't looked at enough of their work to be able to say, is Gray Zone. I think they're also trying to take a very independent approach. And so there you go. Those are two Western media outlets. The Black Agenda Report also, I think, gives a very necessary take. The Black Alliance for Peace has a very specific kind of alignment in terms of anti-imperialism. So knowing that, just go ahead and, take whatever they put out, knowing that lens. Let's see. Let's go through a few more questions. I mean, what am I doing? Let's not even get into that. All right. Give me a second to run through to see if there's any specific questions I could hit. Do you think the polarizing Ethiopian politics can be an obstacle of what you do? Politics is polarized. My goal is to make it less polarized. That's it. When I came out and said what I did about some of the things that I saw with the coverage of the conflict, it was because things were completely polarized. It was either you were pro-genocide or you were a victim of genocide, and nobody was talking about the leadership that got everybody in there. So I like to think, and this will take time, having people come out and say, and people from, a certain group like that have, that are technically from Tigray, right? If we're talking about ethnicity, having people come out and say, no, there are some things that we're not talking about, will eventually balance out the conversation. And that's true with a lot of politics. If we can just, and it takes me a long time, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but it takes me a long time to say anything more about different elements of Ethiopian politics, because I'm now aware, in a way that I wasn't fully aware at the beginning of this war, that these things are complicated, right? Just because someone writes something on Twitter, just because there's a headline and a bunch of media outlets, that does not mean it's the truth. So, but over time, you start to see certain patterns. You do your own research and you realize, okay, there's some truth to what this person is saying or to what this group of people are saying. And then you can sort of decide what you want to do about that. So the same is true here in the US. I mean, if we all just didn't go Black Biden, or Black Democrats that can't do no wrong. If you're Black, Republicans can't do no right, won't even listen. You can still conclude with whatever you conclude with at the end of the day. Maybe you do end up concluding that your heart, on very Democrat, whatever is the case. But do you know why? Do you know why? And are the risks that come with that, blanket support okay with you? So a couple more. Do you think democracy will happen in Ethiopia? It's slowly but surely, I would argue. I think there are a lot of issues that are stemming, some from previous regimes, some from just the nature of people being people, some from the sort of vacuum that is left in certain spaces that should be regulated, that's happening because there's a war being fought and there's a lot of economic issues that are a result of that. There are people taking advantage of that. And hopefully, slowly but surely, that will get cleaned up. And that's why we really have to listen to people when they're saying, this is happening, this is happening. Because if there's a bunch of people from various directions starting to say, like, this entity or this person is doing these things or corrupt or whatever, eventually, if we're paying attention and if we're open to hearing, and I'm definitely open to doing my research, then eventually I think the truth will come out and the less polarized people will be sidelined. Cool, thanks. Someone's tuning in from Ireland. Huh. So, okay, tuning in from Ireland. I recently watched you speaking with Ronnie and Eugene about the war in Ethiopia, and I'm curious to know, for far more, as MSM in both Europe and US have gone quiet. We're in general, I think everyone wants peace and wants to figure out how it's going to happen. There is a national reconciliation body that is being created. To be honest with you, I don't know how they're going to lead us to peace. It is a very difficult situation when you have the entity in Tigray unwilling to step down, as far as we've seen. When you see the majority of the diaspora, although I know a lot of people who don't speak out publicly that are against this war, and some who are against this leadership that has gotten us into this war, and some that are starting to speak out against TPLF, realizing that they really drove the people into these conditions. I don't know what it's going to take for them to step down, for them to put down their arms, but I know that the entire Horn is united in making sure this entity that has caused so much damage, including to their so-called own people, who they could care less about, who, it's scary how many people they're willing to lose for their ego, for the really, literally non-existent chance of getting into power without forcing it on the people. It's a really tricky situation. That's why I say I really don't have the answers to this. Ethnic politics is barbaric and backward. I totally agree. All right, a couple more. Okay, we got to that. Ooh, this is a good one. Okay. Michael K. The thing that makes CNN very dangerous is that they're not quite fake news. They mix in some facts without context to mislead. People with little or no information listen and really believe their news. Ding, ding, ding. Again, there's a panel with a veteran Middle East journalist, Elijah Magnier, who actually spoke to this. He said the biggest lies, the most dangerous lies, have some truth in it. That is what makes places like CNN, like Michael is saying, so dangerous. That is what makes this narrative that we saw around the Joe Rogan experience so effective and dangerous. Because these videos did come out. He did say those things. You may be able to pick apart certain shows and certain guests that he has that shouldn't maybe have had that space to speak. And then you create this guy. I mean, if you're willing to let this democratic space go because of what this guy said years ago, I mean, that's a choice that you are making. And there are consequences to that if there's enough of you that decide that is more important to you than to have more democratized spaces where people can discuss ideas. But know that you're narrowing down the media spaces that you can go to be able to analyze anything. Let's go to a couple more. Would you accept to establish African media if you're asked? That's the goal, God willing. A lot of stuff going on right now, but eventually. How we try that? Okay, let's see. Let me read before I actually read it out loud, just to make sure it makes sense more than anything else. Ooh, that's good. Okay. Oh, you know what? I just discovered something. We can put this on the bottom. Okay. Ashanafi. I like that question. How do you tackle conflicting views, Hermelaye, as a journalist and also in real life with people that do not agree with your political views? I pray that God gives you, I'm assuming you're saying discernment or something like that. So thank you so much and amen to that. The reason that I was even able to come to a more balanced space with the coverage of the conflict in Ethiopia is because I am willing to stay friends with people and listen to people online or in different places that have a different point of view, right? I did not close off these avenues that had different ideas. If you guys have seen some of the heated debates, just basically screaming at the ends of it with friends about the conflict in Ethiopia, back in the first several months, you would be like, oh my God, but you have to be willing to listen. And maybe you're, arguing along the way. But if you're open to those ideas and you start to be like, this person's a good person. I've known them for a long time. This person's a good person. I've known them for a long time. I know they're not racist. I know they don't hate Tigrayans. I know that they're just good people that want honest information. And they're telling me this and they're telling me this. And you start to see a trend. And then you go on the some of the other side and you say, okay, they're saying genocide, but they're not. They're very controlling about how you put where you send the money. They're not willing to say no to war when that war leaves that region. They're not willing to accept that aid was just obviously stolen, like obviously admitted by the leadership in that region, just said it didn't come back because of fuel issues. I did the math for you. I reached out to the UN. They weren't willing to hear that leadership was actually getting aid and was stealing it, using it for, it's like you got to start, like at some point, if you're listening to everybody, then you eventually are able to get to something closer to the truth. And here's the other thing too, I'll say with that. A lot of times you don't have to have an opinion yet, right? That's something I learned from being too emotionally reactive in the first few months of this conflict. Part of that was, sure, my mom was in that region, so I was riding on emotion. Again, I wasn't, I hadn't been paying attention to Ethiopian politics outside of what I saw on the CNNs and the New York Times up until that war. There were certain things I was following after 2018 because the conversation about ethnicity was really coming up, et cetera, et cetera. But that's something I've learned. Like there's a lot of things I see on social media and at different spaces now. And I just say, okay, like put a pin in it. I don't have to have an opinion on this person, this thing yet. Put a pin in it. Like you can just wait to have an opinion. I will say this too about the situation in Tigray. There may be a time, I imagine, I really do leave room for some of these atrocities that have happened, not because of these activists that have told me so, but because there's been a few more balanced documents that have said that they have happened. The Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the UN report. I have to leave room for that. But it's not going to be because of what's being said by the activists on social media right now. In fact, I would argue they have done the most damage to the victims on the ground in Tigray because they have lied so much, as well as the leadership, that a lot of people hear what they say. And it's like, even if there's a little bit of truth in there, it's like, I don't believe you. You've lied all this time. Even when something is true, you use it for a political reason and actually end up doing more damage with that. So I literally just have to, all right, I see it. We'll see. We'll see. Time will come and then I'll be able to make a decision. A couple more questions. You guys are amazing. Thanks for sticking with me. Let's take a look. Someone said it's not as black and white as some folks make it. I'm not following what else you said or what exactly that's about, but that's true for a lot of things. Couple more comments and questions. Let's take a look. Okay. Okay. Yeah. How can Ethiopian have lasting peace if the foundations of our political system is based on ethnicity and language? Yeah, that's the issue with ethnic federalism. That's, I think, a conversation that we're trying to have more in-depth conversation about. What else? All right, bear with me, guys. It's a lot here. AZ, if you see anything, text it to me. It's a lot to go through. All right, let me while my moderator is sending me maybe a couple of more questions to get to. Let me just sort of summarize what this conversation was intended to be about, and hopefully after this, people will have a better understanding of some of the things I've been tweeting about on Twitter about this very coordinated attack on Joe Rogan and why it's really important to not be a part of this reactive entity that will end up co-signing the shutdown of independent spaces like the Joe Rogan experience. Let's sort of summarize for anybody that's just coming in or came in a little bit later. This attack on Joe Rogan, very well coordinated. His show has poked a hole in the idea that in order to have a large audience or make a lot of money, you have to be in corporate media, and you have to be in corporate media that actually can control what you say or the type of stories that you tell and how you tell them. But that's not true when you look at the Joe Rogan experience. He did make a lot of money with the Spotify deal, but they, up to this point, did not dictate what type of things that he talked about and what type of guests that he talked to, right? So you see in mid-January, group of almost 300 doctors coming out and saying that the Joe Rogan podcast should be censored because it's passing on anti-vax information. And then that didn't get a whole lot of attention, but it was in mainstream media. And then you see later that month, the Surgeon General, which is a government official, coming out and saying that specific podcast, the Joe Rogan Experience, should be censored by Spotify because of anti-vax information. A White House official, a government official, I don't know if the Surgeon General is officially White House, but a government official coming out and saying, specifically, this podcast on a private media company should be censored. And one of the quotes that I want to read you guys, I think is really kind of speaks to the heart of the issue in terms of what's considered misinformation and what's not. The Surgeon General says, people have the right to make their own decisions, but they also have the right to have accurate information to make that decision with. So is accurate information just the information that only you co-sign or the government co-signs? I mean, healthcare officials can definitely weigh in, but why does this government official decide what's considered accurate information? People are smarter than I think what corporate media gives them credit for. If we just take our time and really pay attention, we're able to see the holes in narratives. We're able to do what's best for us in terms of health. It's all up to us to really make the final decision, right? So this government official comes out, says this extremely successful podcast with a diverse audience, one of the most ideologically diverse audiences probably in history, comes out and then what you see is Spotify in reaction puts out a disclaimer about some of the the episodes in general, great, cool, disclaimer. That's still giving people the agency. That doesn't mean they can't listen to what comes after that disclaimer. And then the White House spokesperson actually comes out and says, no, Spotify and other tech companies should do more. And then you see immediately that day, this compilation of Joe Rogan saying the N-word from years ago over the course of 12 years come out completely out of context. Again, it doesn't matter whether you think it matters, whether it's in context or not. I'm just giving you that information, which is really what we're talking about here. Like, I'm not making a judgment on that, but you should know that it wasn't him just calling a bunch of people N-word. And then a comment about the apes, horrible. I get it. But I'm not going to spend all this time talking about that because that's what they told me that we need to be talking about. What I want to talk about is why they're all after him, right? So that happens. The White House spokesperson says they should do more. This compilation comes out. Social media is in an uproar. Everybody's super reactive. Now this guy we didn't even talk about before, for a majority of people, is racist. And then Spotify pulls over 100 episodes, poking a hole in the idea that without corporate media censorship, you can be successful or make a lot of money. That's the message ultimately that's trying to be sent. Don't try to do it without us. Don't try to do it in spaces where we can't tell you what to say and how to say it. Because look, even Joe Rogan is being censored by this company, and he thought he was couldn't be touched. So in general, what I'm just going to say is when the corporate media space with the government involved, especially just like we saw with Ethiopia, tells you to hate a leader, tells you to think this people in a country are savage or there's a genocide happening or whatever the case, just wait. Like, you can decide if that's the case. Like, you're not going to be the thing that stops the genocide, but you may be the thing that actually supports the continuing war that's happening overseas, because this government realizes, oh, you're not going to stop that, or you're not going to actually challenge the narrative that they've put out on mainstream media because you're too busy hating this leader, thinking he's a dictator. You're too busy talking about this as a genocide to even ask questions about the context. Why is this country all of a sudden at war? Who is this entity that they're at war with? Like, those are things that would have been really important for us to decide what was really happening in Ethiopia. There's so much going on, guys. I'm going to take into consideration some of these questions in the next conversation. Gregory Casey, let's put your comment out here. I'm shocked at the extent to which people in the U.S. who purport to be open, liberal, woke, whatever, appear to have become as equally close-minded as many on the right. Alex threw the looking glasses at the name of, I'm not sure exactly what that source is, but yeah, that's essentially what's happening, right? Like, if you're a progressive, a lot of us have just stopped critically thinking. We just co-sign everything that comes out of an allegedly progressive mouth or media space or whatever, or a politician. We don't really ask questions, and then we end up voting for this person that writes bills that changes the trajectory of the people in our community. And then we're mad that we did that. And then we fall right back into the trap when there comes time for things like the midterm elections that are coming up, primaries in some states coming up in March. You want to do your research. You want to go to places that are independent in nature to be able to have those conversations. So, you can't say you're better than the people on the right if you're not using your brain, if you've stopped using your brain and being critically analyzing, particularly people in leaderships and particularly narratives that you see in very powerful media spaces. So again, I'll take into consideration some of these comments on the next discussion. I hope to have a guest or two on to be able to give you guys a different take. But I really hope this explained what I'm trying to say. I'm not supporting a racist. I'm not defending this guy. It's besides the point. It's besides the point. There's a bigger thing happening, and it's something that most of us, when I say most of us in the Ethiopian Eritrean community, we have been victims of exactly this kind of just attack, essentially, this organized attack from government entity, as well as the corporate media allies, as well as these professional enablers. So don't then become a part of the crowd that feeds into their narrative about something else, right? We need these places to be democratized. We need places where you can have long conversations. You can make that decision for yourself. Trust yourself in doing that. Do not jump to labeling people based on something that just surfaced, that was literally organized, obviously, and surfaced in the mainstream media spaces. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Please add more comments or questions in the section below. Next time, hopefully, I'll have a little more help in flagging some of the comments and questions, and we hope to have a more in-depth discussion. Thank you. Appreciate you guys. See you later.